I would like now to do another segment of my addendum of extra things which I have thought of after my main recording. The first one I'm thinking of was about horned toads. When I was about 4 years old, I used to like to catch horned toads in the backyard and play with them. I would put them in a shoebox and make a little house for them in the shoebox. I would build furniture for them out of cardboard, make a little bed for them and a little table and chairs and all those things, and carry around this shoebox with my little horned toad in it. I would play with him outdoors and I would play with it in the house. I could take it either place and enjoy playing with it. It was like playing dolls with a horned toad. I remember once I was playing with one when my daddy brought a businessman home for dinner. And this man had never seen horned toads before. I think he was from Kansas. And he was so shocked at the way I played with that little horned toad and the little house I built for him in the shoebox. He said he had a little boy about my age, and his little boy would be thrilled to death to have a horned toad like that. So my daddy asked me to get another shoebox and catch another horned toad and make a little house for that horned toad to give to this man to take to his little boy in Kansas. So I made it. And we gave it to the man. He was so happy to get that horned toad. It was funny to me because I was so used to playing with him. I was shocked anybody would be so thrilled to get one. And he had come down from Kansas in his car. So he put that box with the horned toad in it in the back seat of his car and drove back to Kansas with it to give to his little boy. I thought that was pretty funny. Then another thing I liked to play with when I was about 4 or 5 years old was little trucks. Now sometimes I like to play with dolls and play in the playhouse with dolls. But other times I wasn't interested in dolls at all, and I just wanted to play with little trucks. I had a good collection of some really nice little trucks, and I liked to play with them under big trees where the ground was real loose. There was lots of loose dirt. The grass couldn't grow, and so there was a lot of loose dirt. And It was such fun to play with the trucks in that dirt. I could drive them all around and fill them up, have make up all kinds of little stories with my trucks. So that was another thing that I had fun with when I was 4 or 5 years old. Then something else that I just remembered when I was about that age. In Cleburne, we did not have a radio station that gave news regularly. And the only way that we could get news in between the regular broadcasts first thing in the morning and then at night, the only way we could get news was for the newspaper to put out an extra. They would print an extra paper with the news in it, the special news. And the paper boys would drive all around yelling, extra, extra. And it was so exciting, and everybody would go outside to see what the extra was. And then a lot of times the paper boys would call out, so and so just died, like if it was a prominent person that had just died or something like that. So extras were a big deal and something that was very exciting. The extra was an extra newspaper. It had a copy of the regular paper for that day, plus this extra story at the beginning. So that was what an extra was. And I always loved hearing the paper boys calling extra because it meant something exciting had happened. I remember something else. One time when we had a visitor with us I think from California. My daddy often brought businessmen who were visiting from out of town, often brought them to dinner. And he would call my mother would call my daddy, my daddy would call my mother and ask her to get Lula to come over and for them to fix a nice dinner for this visiting businessman. And he would bring them in. Well, I remember once when that happened, this man from California was there, and a rainstorm came up, and we had a lot of lightning. That man said he had never seen lightning before. Now, I could hardly believe it, but that's what he said. He said where he lived in California, they never had lightning, and he thought it was so exciting, and he was thrilled to get to see it. Well, I had always thought lightning was scary, but this man was so excited to get to see it that I decided it must be something pretty special after all. And I remember that my daddy said he would drive him out to Gatewood Hill where he could see the lightning better. And Gatewood Hill was south of Cleburne, and it was the place where you could get the best view the best view of anything around Cleveland. It was a hill, a real hill. And so we drove this man from California out to Gatewood Hill and just parked the car and sat there so he could watch the lightning. And it was really neat to see how excited he was about the lightning. And from then on, I decided we were pretty lucky to have lightning, and I would not be afraid of it anymore. Then I thought of something that I was afraid of. Still, when I was about 4 or 5 years old, I remember taking a bath, and I loved to play in the bathtub with my little toys. And I had several neat little toys, little boats and little figures and the little cars and things. And I loved playing with them in the bathtub and making up little stories with them. And so I would stay in the bathtub for a long time playing with my little toys. Well, I remember one time after I had been in the bathtub for a long time playing, all of a sudden I got a terrible headache. And I got out of the bathtub and opened the door to the hall and called to my mother, and then I didn't know anything else. That was the last thing I knew, was calling to my mother as I opened the bathroom door. The next thing I knew was sometime later when I opened my eyes and I saw right up above my eyes, I saw a branch of the Christmas tree hanging down over my eyes. And I thought, thank goodness I haven't missed Christmas. That was my thought when I saw that branch. But I really didn't know what was going on. And little by little, I began to wake up and realize that a doctor was sitting there beside me. And I was laying on the sofa in the living room. And my mother and daddy were both standing beside the sofa. And I remembered hearing that doctor saying, she's going to be all right now. And I thought, well, thank goodness I'm going to be all right. And then I remember hearing that doctor say, you need to call the gas company. I was still sort of groggy, but I just remember later hearing some heavy boots walking through our house and wondering what was happening. Little by little, as I began to get more alert, I began to find out more about what had happened. And I learned that the wall heater in our bathroom, the wall gas heater that was keeping the bathroom warm while I took my bath had a leak in it, and some gas was leaking out from that heater, and that's what had given me the headache, and it almost made me very seriously ill. In fact, it almost killed me because that gas from that leak in that leak in that heater, that gas was, it was called carbon monoxide poisoning, and that's what I had. I had gotten carbon monoxide poisoning from that leak in that heater in the bathroom. And if I hadn't gotten out of the bathtub when I did and opened the door to the hall, I would have had too much of that gas. But thank goodness I got out when I did. And and I got out into and fainted in the hall. And my daddy carried me into the sofa, and my mother phoned a doctor who lived just down the street from us, and he rushed down there. And he worked with me and helped me come to. And that's when I opened my eyes and saw that branch of the Christmas tree hanging out over my head and being so happy that I hadn't missed Christmas. And the doctor told my daddy to call the gas company and have them get out there and turn off the gas. And that's when I heard those heavy boots stomping through the house. It was the men from the gas company, and they had come in our bathroom and done something in there to that wall heater and had turned the gas off outside. So everything was done that needed to be done to protect our family. And I had gotten out just in time. So all was well. Thank goodness. And the gas company told my daddy that those wall gas heaters, were bad about leaking like that, and they should not ever be used. So of course my daddy took that heater out and just set a regular little stove in the bathroom. Now, it took up a lot of space, and it was inconvenient having it taking up all that floor space in the bathroom, but at least it was safe. And we would have no more wall gas heaters. And the gas company said they hoped that they would be outlawed soon, so nobody would ever have trouble with them again. So that was my experience with carbon monoxide poisoning. And I was so lucky. Praise God. And it all turned out all right. And I'm so thankful, so very thankful. And my parents were right there and did all the right things so that it all turned out right. Fortunately, that doctor was close by. So it all turned out well. And I'm very thankful for that. Another memory I have of about that time was one Sunday, my daddy carrying a box with scissors out into the rose garden. Now, my mother had planted a number of rose bushes, white rose bushes and pink rose bushes. And on this particular Sunday morning, I followed my daddy out into the rose garden, and he was cutting roses, white roses and pink roses, and putting them in a big box. And he explained to me that he was taking them to church, and that everybody who came to church that Sunday would be given either a white or a pink rose to wear. And he would have a set of pins, and you would pin one of the roses on it. The ushers would have boxes. Other ushers would also, besides my daddy, would be bringing boxes of roses, so there would be plenty for everybody who came to church that Sunday. And Daddy explained that this was Mother's Day. It was the day when we honored our mothers. And so it was a day that it was very important for everybody to go to church that Sunday. Now, it was always important to go, but this was a special day to go. It was a day when we honored our mothers. And so, as everybody came into church in the foyer, they were given a rose to pin on them. And if their mother was still living, they were given a pink rose. If their mother had passed away, they were given a white rose. But everyone was given a rose. And the whole church service was about honoring mothers. And the main thing that we did on Mother's Day in those days was to go to church and to have a church service that honored mothers. There was nothing in those days about giving gifts to mothers or about taking mothers out to dinner or sending cards to them, any of those things like we have today. What we did have was a church service that Sunday in which the preacher and all the music honored mothers. And that was the main thing about Mother's Day, was that church service. And so as people came to church, they were given one of these roses to pin on to honor their mother. Now, I remember as Ann and I got older, my daddy would send corsages to our mother and to Ann and to me. Pink corsages of roses, beautiful roses from the florist. But until the day since the florist started making up those corsages, we used the roses from people's gardens and pinned those on as people came to church. So that was our Mother's Day in those days. And mothers were honored all during the church service. And we were all so thankful for our mothers. And now I need to take a short break before I go on. I've thought of something else I want to add now. I may have already told this, and if I have, please excuse me. But I remember telling earlier that my daddy would take me to prayer meeting with him on Wednesday nights, and I would go to sleep in his lap. But I remember when I got to be about 5 years old, I was able to stay awake during the prayer meeting, and I would hear everybody around the room, well, not everybody, but most people around the room saying short prayers. And my daddy always said a short prayer. And I remember thinking that I would be so happy when I was old enough that I could say a prayer. And when I got to be 5 or 6 years old, I don't recall which, but I remember one Wednesday when I was sitting next to my daddy, all of a sudden I decided this is the time I can say a prayer now. And I thought of a few little things that I could say in a prayer. And so, as soon as my daddy had finished standing up and giving his prayer, I stood up right next to him and I gave a little prayer. And oh, I was so thankful that I could do that. And I felt then that I was more a part of that church than I had ever been before. And I was so thankful to be a part and to be able to say a prayer. Of course, I said prayers at home to myself every night and sometimes during the day, but this was the first time I had ever said a prayer aloud to other people at church, and I was very thankful that I was able to do that. And that was the beginning of many prayers that I would pray in that church. And then I remembered something else. Down on the grounds of the elementary school where I went for the first 7 years of my schooling, on one corner of the grounds around that school were 2 tennis courts. Now, I don't think any of the students in that school ever used those tennis courts. All those students were too young to use tennis courts. But after we finished the 7th grade, as we were getting ready to go into high school, some of our group had started playing tennis. Some of our Copper Club group had started playing tennis and playing down on those tennis courts on the school grounds. And I rode my bicycle down there one day and saw them, and I thought that looked like such fun, and I wanted to play tennis. And I remembered that I had seen my daddy had an old tennis racket. So I went back home and asked him if I could use his old tennis racket. And he got it out for me. And I started practicing with it. I would stand in our backyard and hit the ball, trying to hit it up onto the roof of the house. And then as it came back down and bounced on the ground, I would try to hit it again and hit it back up. And oh, I thought that was such fun. And I just kept hitting that tennis ball and getting more and more used to using a tennis racket. And then, when I felt that I was handling that tennis racket pretty well, I told my parents that I wanted to go down and start playing tennis down on the school grounds with those friends of mine. But I didn't think I could take that old tennis racket of my daddy's. It was one he had when he was in college. And so, sure enough, my daddy bought a new tennis racket for me. Not a real expensive one, but bought one that I could use. And I would ride my bicycle down to the tennis courts on the school ground and meet some of my friends down there. And we would play tennis. Now, we didn't even know the rules for how to play a real tennis game, but we would hit the ball back and forth, and we had lots of fun. Now, this was before the Copper Club had fizzled out of business. And so we would have lots of fun down there, and sometimes boys would come by and stop and start talking to us. And that was when I was beginning to see the value in being a girl, and that it was kind of fun to have a boy talking to you in a different way, not just talking to you about guns and cars, but talking to you about playing tennis and having fun together. And so I had a lot of fun going down there and playing tennis with my friends, my girlfriends, and having some boys come by and stop and talk to us. And I guess you could say that we started hanging out down at the tennis courts. That was the first time I had really done any hanging out anywhere, I think, with friends. So that was my first experience with hanging out with girls and some boys joining us. And we would just talk, and then we would hit the balls around. And the boys would join us in playing with the tennis balls, and then they would just talk to us. And we just had a lot of fun there, hanging out at the tennis courts. And I enjoyed that so much that when I became a freshman in high school, I started taking tennis in PE class. Now, my main purpose in taking the tennis was so I didn't have to play baseball during PE class. But I enjoyed doing it so much that it was just fun for me. And my friends said the same thing. And my closest friends. And that was when we were beginning to break up the Copper Club. But the newer friends I had liked playing tennis and were taking tennis lessons in PE. And so we just had a good time playing tennis and learning more and more about the right way to play tennis. And that was when we started playing on the tennis courts on the high school grounds. And that was even a better place to play. So that was my experience with beginning to learn to play tennis. But long after that, in fact, all through my high school, when I wanted to just get out and get a little exercise, I would go out and hit the tennis ball up on the roof and hit it back and try to keep it going up onto the roof and back down. And that was just a lot of fun for me. And of course, it was good exercise. So that was the story of me and the tennis racket. Now I'd like to say a little bit about my grandmother Lusk. You know, I was the oldest of, I think it was 13 grandchildren. And so my Lusk, that was on my Lusk side. And so my Lusk grandparents were very busy with all of those young grandchildren that came along. And they often kept the younger grandchildren. They were so good about keeping the younger grandchildren for their parents. And everybody seemed to enjoy going to their house. And when grandmother's youngest daughter, my mother's youngest sister, Dorothy, got a job in Temple, a real good job, grandmother and granddad offered to keep her little boy with them in Cleveland. And she was so grateful to them for taking care of him. His name was Jimmy. And Jimmy was a very active little boy. And I know that my mother and her sisters, some of her sisters, were worried about Jimmy being too active for grandmother because he just kept her on the go all the time. And they would say, she's getting too old to have to run after a little active little boy like that. But she insisted on wanting to keep Jenny, and she would keep up with him. It was amazing. And so she kept Jimmy and took care of him. Now, she also took time when she needed to relax. She took time to do handwork. Grandmother was very artistic. And when her 5 daughters were little girls, she used to make pretty little dresses for them. But by the time they started growing up, she had had all the sewing with the sewing machine. She had done all of that she wanted to do. And she stopped doing that kind of sewing. But she started doing handwork instead. And she did beautiful handwork, beautiful embroidery, and other kinds of handwork. And I think when she was keeping Jimmy, that was one of the ways she would relax. When she got him quiet and got him down for a nap, she would relax by doing some of her handwork. And it was beautiful. And when I got married, she made the most beautiful quilt for me that I had ever seen. In fact, I have still never seen a quilt that I think was as beautiful as that. It looked like it had flower blossoms all over it. I really don't know how to describe it. It was so beautiful. And she had done all of that by hand, spending hours working it. But she gave it to me when I got married. She said it was because I was her oldest grandchild. She knew that she wouldn't be able to do things like that for the other grandchildren. And I knew that I was the luckiest one to get to have that beautiful quilt. It was so beautiful that I used it as a bedspread after I got married. And it was so pretty on my bed. I just loved it. So I'm so thankful for Grandmother Lusk and the beautiful handwork that she did for us. And now, I can't think of anything else right now. I'm going to just think for a few minutes and maybe something else will come to me. But this is all I can think of right now. But as I was saying that about Grandmother Lusk, I just was thinking once again of how fortunate I was to have such wonderful, loving grandparents. And that does remind me of something else I want to say. I'm so glad it came to me. When I graduated from high school, my Abbess grandmother gave me 2 prized possessions. She understood that they would mean more to me than anything she could buy. And she was so right. The first one was a cut glass bowl, which had been a wedding gift to her back in about 1880, in the 1880s, probably. I don't know exactly. I would have to look it up. But it was very old. It was made of beautiful cut glass, and Grandmother always filled it with potato salad, delicious potato salad, which she made whenever we had dinner there. So she gave that bowl to me when I graduated from high school because she knew I loved it so. Every time she had served it, I had commented on how much I loved it, and so she gave it to me when I graduated from high school. Also, at that time, she gave me a plate rail, which Granddad had made when he was a young man, and they had hanging on their bathroom, their dining room wall. And I had always admired that. And I had learned that Granddad had made it when he was a young man, just using hand tools. And I was so happy to get that. He had passed away by the time I graduated from high school, but Grandmother gave the plate rail to me. And oh, I was so happy to get it. And now I have it hanging in my kitchen where I can see it every day. And it reminds me of Granddad Atlas and how I loved him. And I have the beautiful cut glass bowl on my hutch cabinet in the living room. So these are two of my treasures because they're so beautiful, but also because they're from my grandparents. And then I have something else interesting which was given to me when I graduated from high school. The clock on the hutch cabinet in the living room is an unusual clock. Now, my Uncle Will, Grandmother's brother, used to have a furniture store. He and a partner had a furniture store in Cleveland, and they bought their furniture from a company in Dallas. And the company that they bought their furniture from had given him this clock because it was so unusual. And they had it, Uncle Will and his wife, Aunt Margaret, had it on their mantle in their house. And I always talked about how I liked that clock. So they gave it to me when I graduated from high school. And I have it on that hutch cabinet in the living room. I'm so happy to have that too. these treasures from my loved ones mean so much. And I'm so thankful for them.